Hey Yellowhead, it's Lindsay and Mike, and we are going to break down the top questions that we've been hearing throughout the riding over our travels in the last few weeks so that all constituents in Yellowhead can be as informed as possible when they go to the polls on April 28th. Michael, why don't you introduce yourself to anyone who hasn't met you yet?
So my name is Michael Fark, and I am the Liberal candidate in the Yellowhead riding for the coming federal election.
Awesome. And so what is the biggest concern that we've been hearing, and what is this election all about when it comes to both the federal level and then also here in Yellowhead?
So I think at the big picture level, what we got is two very clear and different visions for the direction we need to go in as a country and the things that we value. So I think from the Liberal Party and from Mark Carney, what we're seeing is a vision that talks about what brings us together, what unites us. It talks about needing to invest in ourselves, strengthen our economy, and it talks about the things that we need to do to diversify our trade and put us in a better position to deal with some of the challenges, for example, that we're seeing from the United States. At the more local level, what people are really talking about is what is it that they expect from their representative.
Right.
At the end of the day, this is a job, and people have an expectation that if you're going to take the job, that you have the skills and experience to actually do the job in an effective way. They want to know that you're going to be accountable to them, and that there's going to be a quality representation of their interests. And so people, when they're deciding how to vote, they're looking at those two questions. At the national level, which party and which leader is best positioned and has the best vision that aligns with our values on how we want to move forward? And at the local level, who's the representative that can ensure that the local interests are represented in that vision and executed on?
Right. And so the ballot question, there's no, hiding what it is. It's all about Trump and which party and which leader is best equipped to deal with Trump and the tariffs. So what qualifications and expertise do you think that Carney brings to the table, which makes him the best leader to take that forward, and yourself locally?
So I think the first thing that we have to do when we're thinking about the changing dynamic in the United States and how that affects us is to be clear-eyed and really understand what the threat is. So there has been a shift towards an authoritarian movement in the United States for some time.
Right.
Trump is the sort of manifestation of that.
Right.
And we have to be really clear and really honest about what that means and how that can impact us.
Right.
And not just economically, if we're looking at the potential for social unrest, the loss of people's rights, the deportations and things that we're seeing in the United States right now. So those are things that present a real risk to our economy, to the things that we value here in Canada. So the first thing we need is to be clear-eyed about that. And I believe that Mark is the one that is being clear-eyed about that. From my perspective, Pierre, and not just mine, like Danielle Smith has said this herself, that she thinks that Pierre is more aligned with the US government, with the direction that the Trump administration wants to go in. So first and foremost, the question is, be clear-eyed on the threat and which party and which leader is best positioned to deal with that. Mark has a long history in real, concrete, and high-stake roles. His role as the governor of the Bank of Canada was under the Harper administration, so under a Tory government or a Conservative government. His role in the Bank of England was also navigating a very complex time during the period of Brexit, also under a Tory government. So Mark has a high degree of credibility on the global stage. He is known for his ability to bring people together, to engage in good faith and have meaningful conversations, and have the technical knowledge and expertise to find solutions.
Right.
And in many ways, I'm trying to make the same argument here at the riding level. With the work that I've done over the last 25 years of my career, I have a master's in political economics. I have been looking at and working in the spaces where it's emergency and crisis management and communities in crisis and the things that we need to do to build community.
Right.
I've worked in provincial and municipal government. I've worked extensively in cooperation with the federal government. So I have that same sort of basis and foundation to understand how government works and what is needed in order to actually get work done on behalf of the riding in Yellowhead.
Right. And obviously a lot of constituents are feeling the effects of the tariffs and the US government. So if we're viewing this as a crisis, what actually needs to be done? And why is the Liberal Party the best fit to do that work?
Right. So the steps that have been taken by the US government already are pretty much precipitating a global recession.
Right.
And this is not me that's saying this. This is, some of the biggest economists in the world are coming out and indicating that the risk of a global recession is now very high. So what we need is an economic response to that type of situation where we're likely looking at a recession and reduced economic opportunities. So first and foremost, what we need to do is there's been an infrastructure deficit in this country for a large number of years, going back successive liberal and conservative governments.
Right.
And that's the type of critical infrastructure that we need to move people and goods to markets. So we need to really heavily invest in our infrastructure. That's roads, rails, ports, airports, the type of things that industry needs in order to be successful. We need to look at reducing some of the interprovincial trade barriers, coming together as a nation and working together in our common interest. And then we need to diversify our trade away from the United States. So, 80% of trade from Canada has gone to the United States historically. And we need to diversify, not just to strengthen ourselves economically, but also to align ourselves with like-minded countries that have similar values, because those are the allies that we will need when it comes time to address any additional challenges that we may face.
Okay, and so we've also been hearing about the local effects of these tariffs, right? Canola farmers on lumber in different areas. What are the tangible solutions that could be implemented or that you would advocate on if you were elected?
So I think one of the causes of legitimate anger and frustration, especially in Alberta over the last number of years, has been the feeling that it hasn't been a level playing field.
Right.
That the decisions that have been taken in Ottawa have favored industry out east over industry out west. And I think there's some validity to that. And so when we take the example of the canola tariffs, that was Canada imposed tariffs on China in order to protect an auto industry that was heavily integrated with the United States. And that has had a very real impact on our canola farmers. So if government's going to be in the business of supporting industry that is negatively affected by these sort of high-level political and economic decisions that we can't really escape and that are beyond us, then they need to actually level the playing field. And so they should be looking at what are the supports all industry needs in order to weather these types of storms and come out the other side and be more successful. So on the one hand, on the short term, it could be things like financial supports to canola farmers in Alberta, as an example. And then in the longer term, it really is about ensuring that there are other viable markets for our products so that we're less reliant. And probably in the big picture, we also have to sort of re-envision what we're thinking about when it comes to trade and how much protectionism we want to engage in, because we've seen that actually it doesn't create the conditions for our industry to be successful.
Okay, well, those are some really good answers around tariffs and the situation with our big bad neighbors to the south. Now, changing gears, we talked a lot about investing in infrastructure. Something that's been coming up is people are concerned about debt, and they're concerned about what further investment will do to our national debt. Yeah. Can you speak on that?
Sure. So debt is one of those complicated issues. Debt and deficit are two different things. So we are to balance the budget, which is the goal of government, and both the Conservatives and the Liberals have talked about wanting to have a goal of balancing the budget. And there's a different time frame in terms of how long it will take to do that and what is required. And there are different philosophical approaches about how to do that. So the Conservative Party is very much about cutting taxes and cutting spending, and that's going to somehow magically create the environment where businesses will thrive and then we will get additional revenues, and that will somehow allow us to balance the budget. In 50 years of trickle-down economics, there's actually no evidence that has ever worked. On the other side, you've got Mark Carney, who's an actual economist and has implemented these types of policies and understands the economic environment, who's basically arguing, look, now is a time to invest. So especially when the economy goes into a downturn, what you need is government investment in critical infrastructure, because that keeps industry going. And then with the idea being that as you come out the other side and as the economy strengthens, that's the time for the government to pull back. What I find particularly interesting, if you look at the budget proposed by the Liberal government, and the difference between what Mark is proposing and what Trudeau was proposing, for example, is there's a big difference. So under the Trudeau government, the largest percentage of the budget was around operating expenses. So that's delivery of services and sort of the structural built-in costs of running government. What Mark is proposing is a budget where the largest percentage is actually capital. So that's talking about investment. And that investment builds the foundation upon which our industry and our economy can be successful, because it's what that industry needs to get their goods to markets.
And you say infrastructure a lot when we're on the campaign trail. What do you mean by that, and what would that look like in Yellowhead? What infrastructure is needed in our riding where we have a very diverse amount of industries?
Yeah. So roads is the classic example. A few weeks ago, we took a drive up to Grand Cache, where there's both a mine and the timber mill, and the road is in very rough condition. It's quite dangerous. It's in need of significant investment to improve the connectivity between those people and those resources and the markets that they need to get to. So roads is a great example. The rail system to be able to move more goods, ports, so port facilities and airport facilities to allow our ability to move people and goods. Those are the sort of basic building blocks of infrastructure.
Right. Okay, well, there's a lot to hash out there. Talking about infrastructure brings me to the question on interprovincial relationships and how do we get the different levels of government to work together. How do you see the current relationship with the province looking, and what would you do if elected in making sure that we can have good interprovincial relationships with the federal government?
Yeah. So I think where it starts is acknowledging that there is real anger and real frustration.
Okay.
And that some of that anger and frustration is legitimate and has real causal, real causes. So acknowledging that and then engaging with the people that are feeling that way and trying to understand what it is that is really the causal factors for that anger and that frustration. So that's where we have to start. We have to have that conversation.
And what do you think those factors are?
So I think it's, again, what we talked about earlier, the idea that industry and voters in the East are prioritized over for those here in the West.
Right.
A lack of fairness in terms of the amount that Alberta contributes towards the Canadian economy and the transfer payments, and whether or not we're getting our fair share in return, and a feeling of not having as much autonomy and control over our decision making and over our resources, for example. So a lot of people reference Bill C-69, for example, than we might like to have. Right?
And so, what's your take on Bill C-69? It is coming up a lot.
It is coming a lot. So the Conservatives have coined it as the No More Pipelines Act, and I don't agree that that's actually the case.
Okay.
So critically, the big change that it made over the previous legislation that was in place that also placed a very high bar on this type of infrastructure was that it brought in the concept of cumulative effects.
Okay.
Right. So if you have an energy project or an extraction industry project, you can't just look at that project on its own.
Okay.
You have to look at, if there are other similar projects, what is the cumulative effect of all of those projects on our environment, on our social systems, on our economic systems. And so it does raise the bar and make it a higher bar and a higher standard to be met in order to be able to develop that infrastructure. But it doesn't make it impossible, and it doesn't prevent those projects from going forward. And we've actually seen that with some of the recent projects that have been done, including those taken on by the federal government.
Okay, so then let's talk about healthcare, because that's coming up a lot, and some answers around healthcare from other candidates always come back to it's a provincial issue.
Yeah.
What's your take on it? Is it just purely provincial, hands out, or where does your local MP come in to advocate on behalf of healthcare and education?
So there's a lot of...
I threw in education, but I really just mean healthcare.
Yeah.
Sorry.
There's a lot of use of this word jurisdiction and what it means. So there is federal jurisdiction and there's a provincial jurisdiction, and they both have a responsibility around health and education, for example. So at the federal level, we have the Canada Health Act. That is responsible for ensuring minimum standards of care are provided across the country. And that is a critical component. And then the government has, they use the transfer payments that they use to support these initiatives as a means of working with the provinces to ensure that those minimum standards are being respected. It is then up to the provinces to execute on the implementation of healthcare or education.
Yeah.
And so it is a provincial responsibility for execution. It is a federal responsibility for setting the minimum standards. And then the provinces are given a degree of leeway in terms of how they execute on that. What we're seeing in a province like Alberta is the government here is taking a very aggressive approach towards privatization.
Right. And
that is not improving health outcomes or cost efficiency for Alberta taxpayers. What it is doing is creating a large for-profit and profit-driven healthcare model.
Right.
But that's not resulting. It's not reducing wait times. It is potentially creating a two-tier health system, and it is, from my perspective, not keeping with the spirit of the Canada Health Act, which is meant to ensure equal access and minimum standards of care.
And direct action that you would want to see happen when it comes to healthcare?
So I'd like to see the federal government and the provinces sit down and have some further discussion around what is acceptable and what is not in terms of health service delivery. And it should be, again, similar to the previous question about how we bring the provinces together.
Right.
It should be about coming together, sitting down in good faith, engaging in the conversation, bringing the parties together. And for that, you need essentially leadership that focuses on what unites us and how we can find common ground and how we can find solutions. So I would start with that as a starting point for healthcare in specific. And then there's the opportunity where challenges still remain. The federal government has legislative and regulatory tools that they can employ in addition to financial ones, and to incentivize or to work with the provinces to ensure that we're guaranteeing those outcomes. And I'd like to see more willingness of the federal government to use those tools effectively,
right,
in order to ensure that those outcomes are being met.
Okay, well, we've gone through Trump. We've talked about the economy, we've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about healthcare, we've talked about the province. Now let's get to the two big questions that come up, especially for young folks like myself: housing and affordability. What is the role of the federal government? Who's got the best plan, and why would you vote Liberal if you cared about housing?
Sure. So housing has traditionally been a provincial responsibility.
Okay.
And different provinces have had different levels of success in terms of their ability to meet the housing demand in their provinces. But across the country, there is overall a challenge in regards to housing and housing availability, and throughout the full spectrum, right? So the entry-level housing all the way through to seniors who are looking to age in place in their communities.
Right.
I actually don't see a real housing plan from the Conservatives. They talked about a plan, an ambitious plan to build a whole bunch more houses, but they actually haven't provided any details in terms of how they plan to achieve that.
And from the Liberals, what are do they have the details?
So having worked in housing at the municipal level for quite some time, I was actually quite excited about the housing plan that Carney came out with, because it's the first real meaningful piece of policy I've seen come out in housing in a very, very long time. So first of all, it recognizes that the federal government will get back into housing as a core area of responsibility.
Right.
So they will take on the role of actual developer themselves, including on federal land. They will provide equity and debt financing for the building industry in order to promote and create the environment that allows additional development to take place. They're going to invest in new technologies, including focusing on modular construction that is faster, more efficient, and lower carbon footprint than traditional stick-built construction. So that they fleshed out a whole series of really concrete and really tangible initiatives that have a realistic possibility of doubling the rate of housing construction starts in Canada from about 250,000 a year to 500,000. At the end of the day, that increase in supply is the most critical thing that we can do in order to ensure that there is actually accessible housing.
Okay.
And across the spectrum, affordable, accessible, and market, right? And we need housing in all of those spheres.
Well, if you've stuck around this long, there's one last question. This one's very particularly important to me, and I think to a lot of young people, and that's the environment. We're not seeing strong platforms come out around the environment, and I think it's really alarming to young people who are seeing climate change happen in their back door. I'm personally from Jasper, experiencing the fire. What can be done, and what are you going to commit to doing if elected as our MP?
Yeah, I think because the ballot question for this election has been so clear and it's been so focused on the economy and the issues with the Trump administration, some of the other areas that also should be important priorities have been less focused on. And for me, the environment is one of the most critical ones, examples of that. So, the Liberal Party has committed to maintaining the carbon tax on the large emitters. That has proven to be, with evidence, a very effective means of incentivizing investment in the types of technologies that allow us to reduce our carbon footprint, so it's important to maintain that. I have a personal interest in ensuring that we are protecting the watersheds in Western Alberta. They are critical to supporting the water supply and drinking water for our communities and the water supply for our ranchers and our farmers.
So where do you stand on mining then?
So there are a couple of productive mines that are already in existence on the eastern slopes and that should be able to continue through to their end of life cycle. In terms of additional mining on the eastern slopes, I don't believe that there is broad support in Alberta to allow that to continue, and I think that there's broad support in Alberta to protect the eastern slopes and ensure that sources of safe water and our watersheds are protected.
Economy, environment, are they in conflict? Is there a balance? What does it look like if there is one? And then I swear we're done.
Okay.
That's the last question.
Yes. So I'm going to quote somebody who I respect very highly, yourself, who basically said the most important piece of infrastructure that we have is the environment. And so from my perspective, they are not in conflict. It is about trying to find a balance because we need a healthy environment, whether it's tourism, whether it's forestry, whether it's farming or ranching. We need a healthy environment for those industries to be able to be successful. And so we need to find that balance between the initiatives that we take to reduce our reliance on hydrocarbons, to ensure that we're protecting the watersheds, with the fact that we need healthy communities with well-paying jobs and a strong economy in order for people to be able to afford the basic necessities of life. So government in the end is the art of finding imperfect balance, right? There's no elegant solution that meets everybody's needs perfectly. And what government is meant to do is try to find the solution, the common ground that covers the most area of need, knowing that you're never going to solve all needs perfectly.
All right, well, that was a rapid fire Q&A with Michael Fark. We are going to have a live Q&A this upcoming Sunday, April 27th from 7 to 9 p.m. So watch our website and our socials for that link and come join us. If you're undecided and you still need more information and you want to hear from Michael directly to your specific question, that is your opportunity. You can join us online, ask him your questions, and hear him respond to other folks' questions from across the riding. Anything else you want to share with folks?
Just please, it's really important. We actually have a real opportunity to win this seat and have a better quality of representation for the riding in Yellowhead. So super important. Apathy is not an option in this election. Please get out and vote on the 28th.